Welcome to Student Activism Then and Now. I'm Amy Robinson. It's wonderful to see you all here in the auditorium of the Bovee University Center. Welcome. Welcome to our online audience around the state and around the globe. We're glad to have you participating as well. And of course, welcome to our panelists. They're going to make this evening worthwhile. We have history on the stage. It's so exciting. And so I'm going to start by introducing our first panel of four. These are CMU alum and activists from the Vietnam era. And so let me welcome Mary Irvin. We heard her as our songstress just a minute ago, and that's really, as I talked to her and her fellow activists, what she's known for in the group. And she's going to have some great comments for us coming up on how the activism songs can motivate a crowd and also calm people down. It's fascinating. We'll be talking about that. Also, welcome to Ron Williams, who's here from Colorado, and he is co-founder of the Mountain Rush. It's an underground newspaper that was published during the Vietnam era here in Mount Pleasant, and he's continued along those lines through his career, working in alternative media. In fact, today he is executive director of freespeech.org, and so we will be talking to him about some free speech issues, and welcome to his fans. And Kathy Courtney, fascinating woman. When I hear people talk about her, I hear her often described as a pioneer of the women's movement. There are others here who I'm sure could be described that way too, but Kathy, suffice it to say, is no shrinking violet and is out front. She is leading the charge, and we're delighted she could be here with us today from Houston. And so we welcome her. And then welcome the final panelist on our first panel this evening, and that is Rick Kozierski of Detroit. You know, Rick was the student body president when the protests began here at CMU, and he had a fascinating perspective because when the protesters took over the ROTC hall, he was in the university president's house and really got a view of how administration reacted and handled the crisis at the time. So we have a full story here with these four panelists. We want to get started. So Kathy, thank you for your music. Irv, thanks for our music.
We just met each other today. So.
I know, right? Irv, also known as Mary, not Kathy. So tell me, how did you get involved with music in the activism movement?
Well, I think when I was in junior high, I got my first guitar, and I also had come home from a summer camp where actually we were in, quote, Camp Dearborn, which was lily white, but kids that had been to college or somewhere and heard Peter, Paul, and Mary or heard a record came back, and they were singing at that camp when the boys and the girls got together. So that's when I heard If I Had a Hammer. And I thought, wow, cool song. I came home and threw my stuff in my house and went to the record shop and bought Peter, Paul, and Mary's first record and started learning a lot of things. So that was the beginning of it.
You know, it isn't that fascinating because you started learning about activism through pop culture.
Yep, I did.
Yeah. And then from there, tell me more about how you met up with CMU activists through music and incense.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Now, Kathy and I ended up coming to school the same year. It was the fall of '68, Trout Hall, for those who are familiar with campus. And my housemate, whatever roommates, did not like incense. They were about ready to go to the RA and have me, busted. So I smell incense coming down the hallway one night, and I follow it, and there's a long line that goes to Trout, but right at that corner, now I'm starting to hear stringed music of some kind. And I don't know, interesting. So at the door, hello, nothing. Well, there's this huge theater trunk with hippie beads in front, whatever they were, and Kathy was sitting down there playing her auto harp. I play guitar, we both were in choir together, but we also sang songs. We began singing songs together. And being in some of the groups, I don't think I went to SDS, but we had something called SCAR, the Student Committee to Abolish the ROTC Program.
Mm-hmm. So, we're going to be talking more about that in a minute.
Sure.
You know, I want to ask you too, we all kind of know how activist songs can really bring a crowd together and motivate people to go out and march and be passionate and have this cohesive feeling in their protest. But you had a really interesting story about how it can also help people calm down in times of crisis or worry.
Okay. Well, my sample would be, even though this is a little past the times that we were dealing with Vietnam, I was involved with the Freeze nuclear weapons, and we were protesting things up at Wurtsmith. And we had taken several people from Alma who were young students who'd never been to anything before. And it was like, there's this certain line, if we crossed over it, we're going to be on the base, and we would be subject to being arrested. And we were Velcros behind our backs and put in these buses, minibuses, and we're being transported to what was the racquetball courts, which were closed to the base that day except for our processing. So these young kids from Alma were getting really upset, like what is going on, what's going to happen? And then there's the bus driver, who was a guy from the base. And so I just started singing, "Down by the riverside, I'm going to lay down my sword and shield, down by the riverside, and study war no more." And we're making a comment about what he's doing, but it was making them sing, so they were being less agitated in their own anxiety, kind of.
Could you feel the difference?
Mm-hmm. Immediately.
What's your favorite protest song?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm going to ask the rest of you too, so give us some thought while I put her on the spot.
Well, I'm very fond of Joan Baez in particular, as far as women in the folk and protest genre. And she sang a song that I sang early on here called Saigon Bride. And it's very quiet, but it's like, farewell, my wistful Saigon bride. I'm going out to stem the tide. Some say it's yellow, some say red. It will not matter when we're dead. And on. And that some point somebody got, like we were just done with a rally and somebody start kind of like, because I'm singing this kind of soft song. And my friend Bonnie, word, that got a bleep. And shut that guy up.
Have you ever been moved to tears by a protest song?
Yes. Well, Joan sang, now she was on stage down in Kalamazoo the night that the bombing started in Baghdad in 2003. She'd go off stage every once in a while to check with whoever was watching her, listening to the radio, TV, and at some point it did start, and she came out and, this is my song, O God of all the nation, a song of peace for our lands and for theirs. This Finlandia tune that was beautiful. Yes, I wept. It met the moment in a beautiful way.
Ron, let me ask you. I said I would ask each one, so I'm going to start with what is your favorite or most memorable protest song?
Well, certainly music really fueled, I think, a lot of us during the 60s and early 70s in our work, because there were so many artists, so many bands that were singing about social issues, and they were doing, it's poetry, music, it's very magical, it's powerful on a primal level, and so the role of music for me was central in inspiring me, calming me, soothing me, inspiring me. In terms of the answer to your question, I would say Imagine, John Lennon's song. And there's so many others that I could choose, which, all music is it's a matter of taste and what speaks to you. The reason I am talking about Imagine is because I've always thought that our job is twofold. One is to resist and to protest and to challenge injustice, but the other part is to put forward a vision of society that we believe in, to talk about solutions in the future. And I think that Imagine is an unbelievable, holistic, very short moment that speaks to a whole lot of things of what could be. What do we aspire to? It's sometimes easy and necessary to tear down and to challenge and to fight, but if we bring love and compassion and we have a vision for what can replace it, what can transform our lives, that is an incredibly important part. And so Imagine does that for me.
As a protester, I mean, all of you have had your moments where you have certainly been speaking out on unpopular issues, on contentious issues. Does music, it kind of can convey these ideas in almost a more acceptable way, I think.
Yeah, I think music, good social protest music, is propaganda in some ways. It is organizing in its own way. Because it's seductive, it feels good, and it's connecting on a more primal level, on levels that a panel could never possibly approach. And that's why we love that you've incorporated spoken word and music into this.
And now, Ron and I did not really have a chance to talk before the panel. We tried, but just could not catch each other at the right moment. So let me ask you now, what is maybe one of your vivid memories from that time, from your activism days at CMU?
I'll give you two examples that both have to do with ROTC, which I think will come up a number of times, that I think really speak to the question of sometimes you can resist in very small ways, and sometimes you resist in bolder, more risk-taking ways. And I was a disc jockey at WMHW, playing rock and jazz and blues, music programming, not political stuff. And there's a log in radio that tells you when you have to play certain public service announcements with MHW, which is non-commercial. And I saw that there was a 60-second PSA for ROTC. And I don't know when this was, not exactly the year. And so I drew a line through the log. I initialed it, which is what you do according to FCC, and I wrote in Mount Pleasant Food Co-op. And then I basically kind of did a spur-of-the-moment conversation about the Mount Pleasant Food Co-op and why it was a wonderful thing. I didn't really talk about what I was crossing. I just substituted it, and I did it in a way that was appropriate to the FCC regulations. And I was, of course, suspended for 2 weeks off the air because I had altered the log without permission. That's the small thing. That's the small. I couldn't be presenting my music and my commentary and then feel like I was going to promote people joining ROTC and being part of that. The bold part is that when Cambodia was invaded and Kent State went down, we seized the ROTC building, and I was part of that. And I remember one of my vivid memories was sitting in the commander's office with my feet up on the desk, using his phone to call campuses all around the country and get firsthand, immediate reports on other occupations and other demonstrations. And then I would write a little note card, and we had a bulletin board, and we took all the stuff off the bulletin board, and we called it Liberation News, and we were tacking up in real-time reports from around the country of other campuses and what was going on, because we were fairly isolated within the ROTC. So you could say that's one of the ways I got my start in media. That was me.
Well, and let me ask you this. For people who, most of us who weren't here at the time, the takeover of the ROTC building was perhaps the most visual kind of peak of the protest here. So give us a sense for how that occurred, how long you held it, explain a little bit about the situation.
There's probably better people that can do that than I, but I did enter the building the night it was taken. And I remember I found a plastic toy rifle, and there were not too many of us inside the building at that point, and there was a large group of students and other folks standing outside who weren't sure whether to come in, and they weren't sure what was happening, but they knew something big was going down. And I remember hanging out the window and going, shooting the cap gun off, and it created a big laughter, and then more people started coming in. And so I remember that. We stayed in that building for a week, I want to say. There are others here that might have better knowledge and recollection. How long?
It's 5 days and then 12 days for the encampment outside.
Yes.
And President Boyd said, he knows that story. I said, don't worry about it. We got to leave pretty soon anyway. We got finals.
And, the core of this, and we're going to hear, I think, something from former President Boyd later, is that President Boyd had come out of Berkeley, had been a veteran and seen a lot of things in terms of protests. And there,
during the free speech movement.
yes, and there was at the state police post here in Mount Pleasant, they had brought together a riot, heavily armed riot group that were ready, kind of a SWAT team, to come in and clear the building. And many of them were angry at us. They felt what we were doing was unpatriotic, and they were looking to, I think, smash some heads. And President Boyd kept them from doing so. I mean, the cliche was that he brought us donuts. He really knew it wasn't weakness, it was strength, and he was very savvy about it. And I can't say we were able to make our statement in a nonviolent way. We didn't destroy the building or burn the building, and we gave up the building. So we were able to express our outrage. Our protest was allowed to go forward. And yet the property of the university was protected, which probably wouldn't have been if we had been attacked by the police and forcibly removed. And it's such an example of how this dance can happen in a free society that it's something that still amazes me.
And let me ask you this finally, because you have a long history, starting with your bulletin board in the ROTC building and your career since working in alternative media. As you look back now with the perspective of all these years, what would you have done differently, or how do you view that free speech moment in your life?
Well, there's certainly a thread of my work from Mountain Rush really led to, I went to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, after I left Central Michigan. I worked in a factory and then went to Antioch. And I came back from Antioch to Detroit, my hometown, and started the Metro Times, an alternative weekly in Detroit. And we built that out over about 20 years into a chain of alternative news weeklies in different states, Ohio, Florida, Texas. And I started a company called Dragonfly Media in New York in 2000 that was about green sustainability, alternative healing modalities, spirituality, and the environment, and certainly social justice. And have found my way into Free Speech TV now. And Free Speech TV, if you think about television in America, every national television network, without exception, is owned by a billionaire, it's owned by a corporation, or it's owned or to a large degree funded by a government, so it's state. We are a 501c3, we are independent, we are committed to social change and Android TV, we're on Amazon Fire, we're about to launch on Sling TV, so we're opening up increasingly across there. And in terms of what I would do differently, I just feel that I have had a very consistent thread of organizing work, looking at how to adopt various media platforms as tools for social change. And it's not the media people that are the heroes and sheroes. Our job is to amplify the voices and lift up the issues that are shut out of corporate media. So I have 1,000 things I would have done differently in every one of those projects. I've learned through hard knocks, and I've made a lot of mistakes, but I don't have regrets, and I feel there's a continuity in my work.
Very good. Thank you so much, Ron.
Free Speech TV here, at least on cable station, it has Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. And I'm assuming that's still happening. Does anybody know about that? I don't know. But it used to be on every day, and sometimes it was repeated later in the evening.
There are still
Oh, good.
places.
Yay.
And if I may say so, PBS is outstanding. So, okay, Kathy. I know you have a lot to share.
What's my favorite song?
What is your favorite song?
My favorite song is Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. I learned that song in the summer of 1967 at a church in Detroit hearing Dr. Martin Luther King as a high school student. It was awesome, and to hear the voices of civil rights. And then during the so-called Detroit riots or the Detroit Rebellion, you need to look that up, there was lots of people and people coming together, people against racism. I was in YIPFUGS, that stands for Youth, Peace, Freedom, and Justice. So I was already getting radicalized, and I was shocked. And so I heard that being sung, and there was picket lines, and I was with my pastor in my Methodist Youth Fellowship group, and I almost got arrested just for singing on the sidewalk because Governor Romney had declared martial law and said you couldn't have more than 3 people apart at a breast and da-da-da. And I've sang that song all through this Vietnam War and in Washington, and arrest in Washington during the May Days. I sang it with Quakers who were getting beat on the heads for singing and sitting peacefully, non-violent. I've sang it all through the endlessly, seemingly endless wars, the Gulf War, and Iraq and Afghanistan, and of late with Black Lives Matters, and then with the Women's March in January, because I made up, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Sing it. Turn me around, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, marching up the freedom road. So I'm not gonna let cynicism or apathy or pessimism or racism. The millennials at the Women's March really liked, ain't gonna let no dictator turn me around.
So, you mentioned almost being arrested, but you were arrested here at CMU. Tell me about that.
The main one that I do want to talk about is, and as I tell this story, and I'm gonna try, I've cut it down because I know I'm not supposed to give a speech, but it's supposed to be talking, but you know me. So it's live. So I want you to think in your brain, why is it that a US flag still causes so much angst, conflict in people if there's any disrespect to that flag? Where's that coming from? Okay? So for the record, the flag desecration charge against me is false, false, false. You can look it up. And I did not defile, desecrate, or maliciously damage the US flag. And so on May 4th, when the students were protesting about Kent State, and 4 students were killed. You know that, right? And I'll never forget the image of us. Who else remembers?
Jackson State.
And I'm not there yet. But on May 4th, we're watching on little TVs, all squished in, black, white TVs around the dorms. We were shocked, crying, angry. So that's when we moved to take over the building, and the ROTC and other people were doing that all over the country. That's a whole other story. Kajerski knows a lot about that. But the ROTC guys were furious. So on May 14th, 2 more students were killed at Jackson State University, and many injured. So have you heard about Kent State? Sure. 10 soldiers and Nixon coming, we're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming for dead in Ohio. You've heard that over and over. Where's this song for the black kids who were killed at Jackson State? Think about it. Notice the racism, notice the feelings. So we've been meeting around flagpoles around the country, praying and eulogizing and protesting, whatever, for ever since we had flags. But on that day after Jackson State, I met with other art, music, theater, theology students, got together, Dr. Swanstrom, we went to the art department, we got coffins, flags, we dressed up a woman like a Vietnamese shrouded mother, a soldier. I got drummers from the Chip Marching Band. They didn't want to be named, but you know, they had this, yeah. And so we had a very somber funeral procession, remember?
Through every academic building. When they heard the muffled drums, people were to go silent until they didn't hear it, and then classes resumed.
Right, no chanting, loud stuff. It was all very somber. So we're mourning the lives lost at Kent State, Jackson State, the Americans, and those also, the innocents killed in Vietnam. It was pretty somber. But the next day, I was singled out, and I got arrested. And that's a whole other story. Ask me about the Keystone Cops chase through the campus. Different story, not for this
I
record.
watched it happen through the music building.
It was just weird, but it was really scary. Just personally, it was really scary. You go to jail, you get fingerprinted. I was a lot of verbal abuse. I was manhandled. I was really scared. And so I want to give a shout out, thanks to RIP to Reverend Father John Godreau, who got together with pastors, who got pastors' money and bailed me out of jail. And then I didn't know it while students were gathering to protest and take over another building, and Krajewski knows the backstory of that one. So at the hearing before Judge Dent, he was pretty dented. He was real cold. And he refused to listen when we had plenty of witnesses about the flag that was already old and tattered and torn, and the Swanstrom, I heard, still has that flag. Can somebody ask him? It should go to the library here, don't you think? Okay, but somebody ask him. The judge sided, though, with this one military officer and this one cadet who charged me, saying they saw me, purposely, maliciously damage the flag from the second-story window of the ROTC building, well over 200 yards away. He wasn't thinking. He shouldn't have done that. No charges ever should have been. He should have dismissed it. So it was a big hassle for me because there was a lot of losses, with loss of my semester, loss of my job, college work study, loss of my.
Now, as you experience that, let me ask you, so how would you kind of help us to understand or define the boundaries, if you will, of a protest? There is a point where you're peacefully protesting. There's a point where maybe you're involving theater and music and even becoming very engaged and passionate and active. And then there can be a point where people cross a line.
I have a good example of that.
And maybe it turns to violence, it turns to destruction. How do you feel about that boundary?
Well, I have a good example of that because we tried to submit an evidence for those of you who remember, just a month before, downtown at the draft board, young men were tearing up the draft cards and they put them in a fire, they're burning them. And the witnesses, over 200 people witnessed, it was me who leapt from the crowd to pull the flag out of the fire, beating it against my body to put out the fire. And I scolded those people saying, this is not the way to win friends. Do not harm this flag. I guess I get emotional thinking about it because it pissed me off that I got arrested when I've had a whole life of patriotic stuff with the flag and my family and church and schools. And I saved that flag and defended it, saying, you may just be a piece of cloth and you have the constitutional right certainly to burn it and to desecrate it and trample on it, but it really pisses people off. Because it's like a symbol of tribalism, one tribe against the other. And there's other ways to get our message across, and you don't harm it. Because and of course that's flashed forward. Look at all we have now with, taking the knee, Pledge of Allegiance, standing, national anthem. That's a whole other discussion. But and I've been a collector of flag stuff ever since, because I lost, I was guilty. I had to have appeals. I had to have a bunch of kegers and fundraisers. You helped with that. And that was well before, GoFundMe and internet. So I was begging, and I lost a semester at school. And then people say, oh, we should go ahead and press on and challenge the constitutionality of the Michigan law and all that. I'm going, no, the U.S. Congress and the Supreme Court, ever since the 1800s, have protected your symbolic right to do anything you want with the flag. But I have a quote.
Let me point this out while you're pulling up that quote. So I don't know if our online audience can see it, but I'll just mention we have a podium off to the side, and Kathy made a point of bringing an American flag, and that's where we ended up putting it. It is on the podium. So obviously near and dear to your heart.
All right. Well,
just a few minutes left. Tell us what you have.
So my daddy came up with me to be of courtroom support, and then later he wrote an essay and a letter to the editor at the Detroit Free Press, because he was just shocked that he witnessed military officers of the court, police, lie in a courtroom. So we were pretty shocked about that. And I just want to remember that no matter what you do, my lessons are, don't mess with the flag, don't mess with it. It's a religious symbol. And military officers and police and people can lie if they want to bust you. It can happen. You need to watch your back and have your friends. So remember this. when fascism comes to America, you know this quote? It will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross. Who said that? Sinclair Lewis, who said this: those who would burn the flag destroy a symbol of freedom. Yeah. But amending the Constitution to change that would destroy part of freedom itself. Supreme Court, 1989. But don't burn the flag. Don't hurt the flag. Carry on. And be patriotic. And every time you go somewhere for over 40 years since then, I bring the flag. It's me that brings the flag. Oh, Courtney with the flag again. And there are lefties, you know, really literally lefties who go, why do you have to do that in every picture, every demonstration? Because I'm patriotic. That's what. Yeah.
Thanks so much. And now, Rick, you have a great perspective because when all of this protest was blowing up here on the campus of CMU and the protesters were taking over the ROTC building, Rick was in the university president's house. And so you have this perspective of how they learned about this protest that was blowing up on campus and how they reacted. What did you see?
Well, first of all, my favorite song is "We Shall Overcome."
Oh,
the old,
we shall overcome.
But I was student body president. It was May of 1970, and the anti-war fever was high on campus. And I had several good friends that were in the movement. As student body president at that point in time, I was kind of neutral. And as a result of Kent State and Nixon invading Cambodia, there was a protest here at Central that turned into the occupying the ROTC building. I was conducting a meeting of the Student Senate, and my vice president at the time, Mike Leader, said that he was going to go somewhere. And during the Senate's business, one of my friends, John Childs, appeared up the stairway of the auditorium in the Pierce building and came down the stairway and whispered in my ear, "We're taking the ROTC building." And I swallowed and continued with the Senate meeting. And right after that, I went back to see what was going to happen in the mall. And I received a call back at the dorm from the president who said, "I need you to come to my home now." And I went to the president's home, and all the deans were there, the vice presidents were there, the police chief of Mount Pleasant was there, Tom Martin, and a news reporter from WCEN, Mount Pleasant Radio. And the discussion centered on what to do from this point on. Several deans, the provost, Charlie Ping, wanted to clear the building. And President Boyd, of course, that was not one of his plans. One of the vice presidents, and it comes from an unusual place, the vice president of business and finance, Norval Bovee, who this building is named after, led the discussion that the building should not be cleared, no attempt should be made to violently clear the building. At that point, the city police chief, Tom Martin, said, "We do not have enough police officers in this county to clear this building, and I advise you not to try and clear it." And we had several contacts with Tom Martin throughout anti-war demonstrations in Mount Pleasant, a couple of marches that went downtown, a march that went to Mission Street and closed the street for 20 to 30 minutes on a Friday night. And we were fortunate not only that we had President Boyd, and we had good faculty, good deans, some of the vice presidents that were behind us. So the whole scene surprised me. I went after that meeting to the building, and my vice president, Mike Leader, had come out of the building by then. But violence was averted, and this campus came very close
to violence that evening at the president's home.
And Rick, let me ask you, because we often hear in a crisis that those first moments really can be defining. And it sounds like you had some cool heads during those first moments. How much of a difference do you think that made? Did you feel the situation, some of the energy settle down after you got through the initial takeover?
Well, I wasn't in the takeover, so my friends were.
Right.
As far as the administration, I felt more comfortable after the meeting. I was very surprised during the meeting that the university provost, of all people, wanted to use the police to clear the building, and fortunately he didn't prevail, and cooler heads prevailed, including the president and the city police chief.
And he wanted to bust some heads. There were people who were locals.
No, he didn't. But
He didn't, but-
some of the people at the state police post
Militarists.
wanted to use police force. The commander of the state police post at that time dissuaded his troopers from doing that and said that he would not participate in that without cooperation with the university. So we were fortunate on a number of areas that the protest stayed peaceful.
And those of us on the inside made commitments to Boyd. Rick knows this. We were not going to trash the building, burn it. It wasn't going to be here. It was going to be, all inside, outside. And when, I won't say who, but a couple of hotheads wanted to open up the armory. There's guns in there, And so we stationed Delaney, the one of the biggest black, big-haired guy we knew. You're guarding the armory. Don't let people in and mess with these guns and get any guns because this is going to be peaceful. And he goes, got it. And so it could have gotten worse, but it didn't happen.
So Rick, the takeover of the ROTC, or as you say, ROTC, extended over the better part of a week or more. And so maybe, I don't know if you can answer this, but was there a tipping point? Ron talked about not only protesting what you don't like, but then having some conversation about promoting love and the things you do want. Was there a moment or a period where it shifted from protest to more dialogue?
Yeah, John will talk about that with the
Sure.
education, the freedom schools, the teach-ins that we did, the faculty.
The tent city that was set up on Warner Mall.
Right, so long term that occurred. Did it occur during the ROTC?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And tell me about that.
Well, I don't know, several hundred, less than 500 probably, students put up a tent city outside of Warner Hall in order to protest the war and to maintain a presence on campus, at the center of campus, the administration center of campus, Warner Hall, and that went on for how long,
12
Kathy?
days, 5 to 12 days was
Yeah.
the intensity of it. Yeah.
And President Boyd dealt with that in the same equal, cool manner that he had dealt with the takeover of Freedom Hall by the students, in that he did not have the police clear the tents and the residents of those tents. He talked with them about sanitation. He made some university services available. And he even called some parents about some students who, when the tent city was going to dissolve, there were a handful of students who stayed behind that didn't want to leave, and Dr. Boyd called their parents and got their parents involved, and they finally left. I mean, that's the kind of person that he was, and we were fortunate to have him because there were a lot of people out in the community that were unhappy that this building was taken, and it was a university building. There were people in the legislature who were unhappy. A lot of pressure was put on President Boyd by the legislature to end this protest. Fortunately, we also had Governor Milliken at the time, who was a moderate Republican, none of which any of you who are young would even understand what that is. There's no such thing today. But in those days, we did have moderate Republicans who could be reasoned with.
Well, it is time now for our panel switch. I want to thank,
Oh, I didn't know that. We're not gonna, who's gonna talk about all the methods of the movement, all the things that we did, and all the things that you can't do? Okay, afterwards, meet with me if you're a member of an organization. I want to talk about how do we shape a movement and organize from the small things. I have a whole handout on how do you go from, people say, I'm not political, I don't know anything. I go, do you recycle? Something. So you start from reading and studying and supporting and all the different ways that build a movement for your issue or electoral candidates, and how do you win?
so after we are done with both panels, there will be a reception out in the lobby, and so people here in the auditorium, we do invite you to talk with our panelists and get more information from them.
Two things. One,
Ron.
I just want to honor you and your team for putting this together tonight. It's an incredible opportunity for us to have an important series of conversations. And second, I know all of us are anxious to speak with any of you in the audience during the reception, so please stick around.
Carry on.
And if you're a singer, collect songs.
So before we break, I want to let the auditorium know and you at home that we are going to have a few minutes of some words from the former CMU president, Bill Boyd, who was so instrumental in actually keeping the peace here on campus during those really difficult days. And so we're going to have that while we switch out the panels, and then we'll be back to talk more about activism then and now.
And live stream, can they write live stream comments and questions?
Let me ask a question about the student demonstrations that happened in May of 1970 and a tent city that was set up, the People's Park that was in Warner Mall after the Kent State shootings.
Yes.
In comparison to Berkeley, how did you view these events?
Well, I was surprised and pleased by the good nature of the central student body. For example, when they occupied what became Freedom Hall, the ROTC building, they permitted an inspection every day by the administration to be sure that sanitation was okay, etc. I couldn't have imagined that happening at Berkeley. When Sproul Hall was occupied, for example, it took police to get the kids out. There weren't any daily visits by an administration member. So I was surprised by the good nature of the students who occupied Freedom Hall. And